Anko was already waiting for him when Iruka arrived at the training grounds early the next morning. It was 8:30, the shadows still long and the air still chilly, but Anko looked a lot more alert than Iruka felt. He muffled a yawn as he crossed the training field to meet her in their usual spot. "You're the one who said we had to meet early," she said as he reached her. "That doesn't mean I can't be tired." Iruka muffled another yawn and Anko rolled her eyes. The training grounds were fairly empty at this time. Iruka had passed a genin team a couple of fields over, but otherwise the area they'd chosen was quiet. "Why'd we have to meet at the crack of dawn anyway?" Anko asked, starting to stretch and warm up her muscles. Iruka joined her, following her lead. "You embarrassed to get your ass kicked when people are watching?" "No," Iruka lied. That was exactly the reason he'd scheduled their spar for so early in the day. Anko was better than him at taijutsu and he liked her more than his own teammates, which was why he'd asked her to help him out. It wasn't that he minded her handing his ass to him, but the last time they'd sparred, he'd spent the following week fielding off commiserations and unasked for advice from well-meaning umbu. One of them, Iruka had never found out who, had even left him a gift basket full of medical supplies, and a card that had been printed with "Get Better Soon," but the mystery umbu had edited it to say "Get Better at Taijutsu Soon." It was signed "Your Friends in Umbu" with a crooked smiley face. Iruka had kept the card but he'd hidden it under his bed so he didn't have to look at it. He would die if Anko ever found out about his cheerleading squad. "I'm busy this week," he told Anko instead. "But I know you'd miss me if I didn't fit you in." Anko scoffed. "More like you'd miss me. You ready to fight?" "Sure," Iruka sighed. "As ready as I'll ever be. Stay away from my face this time, I don't want another black eye." "Get better at blocking then." Anko grinned, and it was the only warning Iruka had before she came at him, fists flying. Iruka ducked under her first punch, aimed squarely at his nose, naturally, and had to dodge her other hand, which made a grab for his ponytail. Anko fought dirty, which was why Iruka wanted to learn from her, and she was not above scratching, hair-pulling, or trying to kick him in the balls. She'd never managed to land a kick there, but she refused to let him rule it off limits. "Your enemies won't play fair," she always said, "so I won't either." It was a good point, but Iruka wished she wouldn't take so much joy in beating the ever-loving crap out of him. He swung a kick at her ankles and she dived straight into him, her full weight plowing into his chest while he still had one foot in the air. They both went down, Iruka letting out a startled yelp before he hit the ground and all the breath was knocked out of his lungs. Anko landed on top of him, so much heavier than she looked, and he dearly wanted to tell her so but he could barely draw in a breath. Anko was less stunned by the fall, already reaching for his arms and trying to pin him down. Iruka squirmed, trying to push her off, but she was letting her full weight rest on his torso and he had no leverage. She grabbed one of his wrists, and smirked at him. "This might be my quickest win yet," she panted. "I thought you were meant to get better, not worse." "Don't get cocky," Iruka gasped. He jabbed his fingers hard into her side and she creased up, her grip slipping enough for him to tear his wrist away. Taking advantage of her distraction, he braced both elbows on the ground and heaved upwards just as she shifted above him. Something smacked hard into Iruka's mouth, a clash of bone on bone that temporarily whited out the world with pain. He fell back onto the grass, groaning and raising a hand to his lips. His teeth hurt and his lips were on fire. Above him, Anko was also moaning in pain, a hand wrapped over the lower half of her face. There were tears in her eyes, and she blinked them rapidly away. "Fuck," she said, the word muffled. "Am I bleeding?" She removed her hand, and there was indeed a cut on her bottom lip leaking blood. A little. Iruka tasted blood too, though he wasn't sure where it was coming from. "Damn, Anko, what did you even do?" "Me? You're the one who punched my mouth with your mouth." They both froze as the implications of that sunk in, and then Anko scrambled off him so fast that she accidentally dug her hand into his stomach again, winding him for the second time. Iruka couldn't care less. He rolled away from her, face burning, praying that if his cheeks were red she'd put it down to the impact and not the fact that they'd kind of sort of not at all kissed. "Oh my god," Anko muttered. "I can't believe you just did that." "I didn't do anything." Iruka protested, panicking now. Did she think he'd done it on purpose? Why would he even want to smack his face into hers? This was the most mortifying thing that had ever happened to him. He pushed himself upright to find Anko sitting beside him and cradling her jaw. When their eyes met, they both jerked their gazes away as if they'd looked straight at the sun. After a moment of awkward silence, Anko jabbed her finger at his face. Okay, listen, she hissed. That never happened. We just punched each other in the mouth. No big deal. Right, Iruka said quickly. That's exactly what happened. And we never, ever speak about this again. There's nothing to speak about. Right. There was another awkward silence, and then Anko got to her feet, wiping the back of her hand over her lips and smearing the blood across her chin. Iruka didn't point it out. Okay, she said with forced casualness. I better go. I have, stuff to do. Yeah, me too. Iruka scrambled to his feet as well. See you around. Sure. Anko was looking everywhere but at him. By then, she was gone faster than she'd ever left him before, and Iruka couldn't blame her. The embarrassment was still hot and acidic in his stomach and his jaw still ached. He tentatively probed at his teeth with his tongue, making sure that none of them had been knocked loose. There was no way that could count as a first kiss. Could it? He sure hoped not. Anko was the last person he wanted to lose his first kiss to. It wasn't until he was trudging across the training field after her that the suspicion twinged at the back of his mind. He stopped dead and turned in a slow circle, scanning every tree for the telltale glint on sunlight on metal. Only when he came full circle did he relax. No trace of an umbu anywhere. Thank God. None of them would ever have to know. So Iruka, Eagle said that evening, I hear you have a girlfriend. Iruka almost fell off the couch. He'd been dozing in front of the television and hadn't heard Eagle let himself in. He let out a small high-pitched noise that was definitely not a scream, and whirled around to find Eagle standing by the window and trying to look casual. First of all, could you knock? Iruka said, trying to calm his thundering heartbeat. And second, that is a lie. Who told you I have a girlfriend? Don't worry, we kept it a secret, Eagle soothed him, as though that was supposed to be reassuring. It isn't public knowledge, I promise. None of us want to embarrass you. There were so many things wrong with that statement that Iruka didn't know where to begin. Who's we? He settled on. Just a few of us, Eagle said vaguely. We're all very happy for you, Iruka. Of course, you're at an age now where you start noticing girls. That's only natural. He rounded the sofa and perched awkwardly next to Iruka, then seemed to notice his own stiff body language and tried very hard to relax into the cushions. It took all of Iruka's willpower not to flee into the safety of his bedroom and seal the door with the strongest wards he knew. He could feel the heat in his cheeks again. How did Umbu always know when he'd humiliated himself? Couldn't he do one single stupid thing without them gossiping about it? I don't have a girlfriend, he said flatly. So thanks, but we really don't need to talk about this. There's no need to be embarrassed, Eagle said. Anko-chan is a nice girl. Very spirited. Iruka shut his eyes and prayed that a missing nin would burst in and assassinate him right now. But the other Umbu and I were talking, and, well, we don't think it's appropriate for you to canoodle in public. Iruka's eyes shot open and he stared at Eagle, who was twiddling his fingers together in his lap and gazing fixedly at the television. Canoodle. Iruka repeated, not sure whether to laugh or combust from embarrassment. Eagle cleared his throat. Make out, he said, each word wooden. Iruka spluttered. We weren't making out. We were sparring. She headbutted me in the face and nearly knocked me out. Look, Iruka, I'm not here to judge you or tell you you're too young to start dating, Eagle said, even though it was clear from his tone that that's exactly what he'd like to do. But the other Umbu and I decided that since you've reached a certain age, well, there are things you need to learn to ensure you and Anko stay safe. Oh my God, Iruka said. You are not going to give me the sex talk. No. This is not happening. He stood up and pointed to the window. Out. Aren't you on the clock? The Hokage isn't paying you to give me life lessons. Eagle held up his hands defensively. Oh no, he said. I don't think I'm qualified to teach anyone about healthy relationships. None of us are, we're Iruka, we don't have a clue. Iruka blinked at him, arm drooping. Oh. Then what? He trailed off as Eagle reached into one of his weapons pouches and drew out a small paperback book. It had a lurid orange cover featuring a photograph of an attractive couple giving each other smoldering looks and not wearing enough clothes. Here, Eagle said, standing up and proffering the book to him. This should teach you everything you need to know. Iruka gingerly took the book, squinting at the title. Ika Ika Paradise. It's a great series, Eagle said. Very romantic. Very passionate. Give it a read, and if you have any more questions about girls, he hesitated. Ask Viper. She knows about woman stuff. Iruka placed the book on the couch very carefully, like it might bite his fingers if he moved too fast. Great, he said. I'm still not dating Anko, but if I agree to read the book, will you stop talking and leave? Yes, Eagle said, moving hastily over to the window. I know this is an awkward subject, but if you ever need to discuss anything at all, you know you can always talk to Viper. He slipped out of the window in one smooth movement, and then he was gone, presumably to the rest of the group who were hanging back somewhere out of view and waiting for him to tell them how it had gone. Iruka couldn't see them, but he knew they were there. He hung out of the window as far as he dared, the breeze cooling his burning face. I'm not dating Anko, he yelled. The next morning found Iruka down at the training grounds early again. This time he wasn't meeting anyone, and he chose a field as far from the few other early birds as he could before pulling out a handful of seals and his textbook and sitting cross-legged on the grass. Yesterday had been an embarrassment from start to finish, and he was determined to put it out of his mind. The one thing that was guaranteed to absorb him for hours at a time was his seals work, and so he planned to spend his morning practicing some exploding tags. There were a few modifications in his textbook that he'd been eager to try, but it was the sort of work that required a large empty area. Usually he'd go out into the woods beyond the village walls, but Umbu had scolded him when they'd found out. What if you hurt yourself and no one knew where you were? Viper had asked. If you're going to work alone, you need to stick to the training grounds. No buts, mister. I don't care how careful you think you are, accidents happen. It was annoying, but it also made sense, and so Iruka had grudgingly agreed not to test anything dangerous outside the village walls. He had already created a few tags the night before, and now he went over each one, comparing it to the designs in the book and checking his work. He spotted a mistake in one of them and sighed, pulling out a fresh sheet of chukra paper and uncapping his fountain pen, resting the paper on the book as he drew a fresh tag, wholly focused on the lines of black ink. Planning some trouble, a voice asked right next to his ear, and Iruka jumped, streaking a line of ink across the tag and ruining it. For fuck's sake, he said loudly, turning to glare at Hound. You did that on purpose. Hound was squatting behind him, peering over his shoulder at the tags, unapologetic. You're not very observant, he said. You should work on that. If an enemy got this close so easily, you'd be in trouble. I shouldn't have to worry about that in the village, Iruka snapped. Back off, can't you? It was like that weird encounter the other night hadn't happened. Hound had lost his awkwardness and was back to being a huge pain in Iruka's backside. Belatedly, Iruka remembered that he was supposed to be befriending Hound. He was starting to think this mission merited its B rank, mostly because he was so annoyed every time Hound showed up that it was difficult to stay focused on his goal. You can stay and watch if you want, he gritted out. But only if you stand back when I tell you to, because there are going to be a lot of explosions. Why the sudden interest in explosives? Hound asked. Because that's the chapter of the book I'm up to, Iruka said, jabbing a finger at the page. You know I'm studying this, right? You really expect me to become a seals master if I never practice? Hound looked around, exaggerating his movements. I don't see your teacher. She's not my babysitter. So the position's open. Iruka paused, not sure how to take that. It was rude, but Hound had also just admitted that he wanted to stay. If you wanted to watch a master at work, you just have to say so, he said. Now shut up and don't distract me while I redraw that seal you ruined. To Iruka's surprise, Hound stayed quiet while he re-inked the tag. When he'd capped his pen and was waiting for the ink to dry, Hound leaned forwards to inspect it. "What do they do?" he asked. "Besides explode, I mean." The question took Iruka off guard. Hound had never taken the slightest interest in his seals before, aside from occasionally confiscating them when he deemed Iruka to be up to no good. Which, admittedly, was often the case. But Iruka wasn't about to complain, he was always happy to talk about his passion projects, no matter how ignorant his audience. "I've made 3 modifications," Iruka said, lining the seals up in a neat row and keeping a finger on the corner of each one in case a breeze picked up. "This one is supercharged, so the explosion should be twice as big as normal. This one should explode with shards of ice, and this final one is a smoke bomb modification. I'm trying to figure out how to make a poison bomb." Hound had been gazing at the tags, but now he looked up at Iruka sharply. "To gas your opponents?" he asked. "Yeah, exactly. But it's the most complicated, so it'll probably need a lot of work before it's ready." "You're planning to test that here? It sounds dangerous." "I'm not an idiot," Iruka said. "I've given it a small charge, half as strong as a normal exploding tag. I think the range should only be a few feet." "Only as long as there isn't a breeze," Hound said. "How long does it stay in the air for?" Iruka hadn't thought about that. "Not long." Hound gave him a look. Even with the mask, Iruka could feel the waves of skepticism and disappointment rolling off him, more potent than any poison. "This is exactly why I need to experiment," he said defensively. "So I can figure this stuff out." "This is exactly why you shouldn't experiment alone," Hound corrected. "If I hadn't been passing by, you'd probably have poisoned yourself." "What kind of poison are you using anyway?" "A really mild one, obviously. It just brings you out in a rash in small doses." "I'd be fine." "What happens if it gets in your eyes? Or you breathe it in?" "I don't know, but if you keep bugging me, I'll try it on you and find out." Iruka shoved the book back into his bag and gathered up the tags. "I'm going to test them now." "Not the poison one," Hound said flatly. "I wasn't going to just set it off in the middle of the training field anyway," Iruka huffed. "I know how to test them safely. I set up a barrier first." Hound hesitated. "To contain the explosion?" "Obviously." Hound thought about it. "You still don't know how long the poison stays in the air for." "I'm going to veto that one." "Fine," Iruka said, rolling his eyes. He'd just have to test that one later, when Hound wasn't around to stop him. "Anything else you want to be a killjoy about?" "I'll let you know if anything comes to mind." "Thanks," Iruka muttered. He set up the ice seal first. This was the one he was most excited about. The textbook had suggested water, which would be heated by the explosion and scald anyone caught in it, and Iruka would probably try that sometime too, but copying seals straight out of the book was no fun. It felt like cheating to use someone else's work without changing it even a little. So he'd kept the water element but switched out the heat for cold. Figuring it out had taken a long time, partly because he'd kept getting distracted by other cool elemental seals, but he felt confident enough to start testing now. Hound hovered close by as he placed the explosive tag in the middle of the training field, then placed 3 barrier seals around it, priming each one with a tiny amount of chakra. He then chivied Hound to the edge of the field, checked to make sure no one else had come close, and then activated the barrier. "All right," he said, grinning with anticipation. "Let's try this." He made a hand sign, and the tag exploded. The barrier didn't muffle the sound, and the vibrations carried through the ground so that Iruka felt a tremor beneath his feet. There was still a flash, but it was white light rather than the blooming orange of flames, and a mass of tiny projectiles hit the barrier. It was over in a couple of seconds, and they were too far away to get a good look, but it seemed promising. Iruka ran back over, taking down the barrier when he got close so he could inspect the remains. There were little balls of ice already melting on the grass. Iruka picked one up, but it barely lasted a second against his skin. He hummed thoughtfully. "Not cold enough," he muttered. "Or maybe they were too small." He sat back on his heels, surveying what remained of the ice. Most of it had already melted. Maybe there had still been too much heat in the explosion. It was hard to tell when he couldn't see the damage they'd caused to the barrier. He made a mental note to try the next one on a weapons target, or something that could measure the effectiveness of the blast. He was so absorbed in thought that he'd almost forgotten about Hound, who suddenly appeared beside him, also observing the remains of the ice. "Have you thought about using lightning?" he asked. Iruka blinked at him. "What? If you combined lightning with the water, it would be much more deadly," Hound expanded. "Especially with the ice, if you made it sharp enough to pierce the skin, then you'd deliver the electricity right into your opponent's body." Iruka hadn't considered it, but now that Hound mentioned it, it was a really good idea. "I think I need to master the ice first," he said. "And I've never really tried anything with lightning, but yet, I could make that work." "That's another one you shouldn't test alone," Hound added, as though remembering suddenly that he was supposed to be the health and safety monitor, not the guy encouraging Iruka to come up with new ways to accidentally kill himself. Yet. Iruka rolled his eyes. "Are you volunteering to be my SEAL supervisor?" Hound paused. Iruka had meant it flippantly, but Hound took everything far too seriously. "I can't be around all the time," he said. Iruka waited for him to go on, but he didn't. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. Iruka was reminded of the other night when Hound had needed lots of prompting to give voice to a whole thought. Was this some weird quirk of his, or was he just allergic to saying anything remotely nice to Iruka?